Boy, have we got a great story for you in this episode, with lots of twists and versions on where this treasure is located. There was a lot of mining activity going on in this area by Native Americans, the Spanish, and Frenchmen. So I think all these versions could be true. I think there are several locations all rolled into one. Let's see what you think. Hello, Gary here, and welcome to another episode of Lost Treasure Stories. Today we're going to cover the story of the lost Frenchman gold. There are conflicting stories of the location of where this extremely large and valuable gold is hidden. We're going to cover the different versions of the story, each one with so-called proof to back them up. In the end, I think you'll agree that it's a reasonable assumption that even though back in the day it was believed each version of the story was talking about the same lost treasure site, that there are actually multiple sites in that area, so each version could be true. Okay, let's get started. My friend Rocky the Robot is going to start with a newspaper article that appeared in a weekly journal Miner out of Arizona on February the 24th, 1950.
For the fifth time in 10 years, Timothy Ward is with a party of miners which is seeking the treasures of a lost Frenchman gold cache on the desert, a letter being received a few days ago stating that he and 3 others are scouring the desert region northwest of Ehrenberg. George Wheeler is also at the party. This expedition was organized under the representations made by Ward, who claimed to have been in the close confidence of an Indian woman, who for several years lived at Old Collins Well, and for favors extended her, she outlined vaguely the location to be explored. This movement is due, like many others, to the legend of the desert, apparently well-founded, wherein a party of highwaymen were said to have robbed certain miners who were leaving Rich Hill in the early 60s, and made away with a large amount of gold dust. All were ambushed by Indians, and but one escaped, he a Frenchman. The latter is supposed to have perished on the desert later and to have cached his riches. This belief has been the lure to take scores of prospectors to the desert in years past. Ward also writes that later in the year, he and friends will go to Peoples Canyon, near the Santa Maria, if they are unsuccessful. A. H. Peoples, after whom this strip was named, resided in Peoples Valley, and after exploring that region for many years, gave up the search, going to Phoenix, where he passed away, confident to the last breath that the lost Frenchman was hidden in that rugged defile. Peoples also had a tip given him by an Indian woman. Okay, that concludes this newspaper article, and now we're gonna read a story that appeared in the Arizona Republican newspaper March 16, 1897. The article refers to the Eagle Tall Mountains, which was probably a misprint as the mountains in that area were actually named the Eagle Tail Mountains. The name referred to as Elchabarger in the story may have been spelled wrong. It may have been talking about Mr. Ehrenberg, whom the city of Ehrenberg, Arizona was named for. Ehrenberg, Arizona is in this area. But here's the story. Editor John W. Dorrington of the Arizona Sentinel, who came up from Yuma yesterday, said that the mining excitement in consequence of the late gold strike in the country between Castle Dome and Eagle Tall Mountains was on the increase. The still later discovery of gold within the city limits of Yuma, a circumstance in itself sufficient to produce a wild excitement, has been overshadowed by the phenomenal find in the northeast. There is no longer any doubt in Yuma or among old prospectors and miners that the lost Frenchman mine has been rediscovered after more than 25 years. The mine whose very existence was half doubted was so named because it was supposed to be worked by a couple of Frenchmen, one or the other of whom used to make periodical visits to Yuma after supplies which are always paid for with large gold nuggets. Fruitless attempts were made to learn from them the locality in which the nuggets were found, and equally fruitless attempts were made to follow them. The Frenchmen always succeeded in leaving town unobserved. One time they were followed by a party of Mexicans whom they managed to elude near Agua Caliente. At last the Frenchmen came to Yuma no more. As it was evident that they would likely leave the country in no other way than through Yuma, it was supposed that they had been murdered by Indians. Years afterward, a skeleton was found in the vicinity of the late strike. It was believed to be the skeleton of one of the Frenchmen, and though there were no workings in the vicinity, interest in the supposed wealthy mine was revived and the whole country was prospected over again and again. Of late years, people only smiled when the lost Frenchman was mentioned. The gold brought in from the new strike is said to be of the same character as the gold with which the Frenchmen fired up Yuma a quarter of a century ago. Mr. Dorrington says there is a sick and disgusted prospecting party in Yuma. About 3 weeks before the country was electrified by the discovery of Elchebarger and his companion, this party camped one night on the very ground where the strike was made. The members of the party consoled themselves by the observation that nobody but an infernal fool would think of looking for gold in such an unlikely locality. But it is in such localities that all the great strikes in Arizona have been made, and almost without exception they have been accidents. The latest discovery, the Pierce Mine, has been tramped over by prospectors since white men first came into the country, and La Fortuna lay on the old Sonora Road traveled for years by thousands of men. The discoverer of La Fortuna was in the frenzy of delirium tremens, and he afterward admitted that if he had been in his right mind he wouldn't have been in that neighborhood looking for gold. And that's the end of this newspaper article, but the same paper published another article a few days later talking about the ongoing search for the lost Frenchman. So if it was already found as their previous article stated, why were people still looking for it? Oh well, here's their April 4, 1897 article. 3 prospectors are now in the southeastern part of the SH Mountains endeavoring to locate the famous lost Frenchman mine which is supposed to have existed 30 years ago. A quick note here, the SH Mountains as they were sometimes referred to, was an alternate name for the Kofa Mountains. Okay, back to the story. They were sent out by George W. Norton of Mohawk, who believes he is on the track of the lost mine. The fact that the 3 Frenchmen came to Yuma with $1,500 worth of ore and left $1,400 on deposit with Barney and company of that place, which was never called for by the Frenchmen, goes to prove that the mine did exist. And Mr. Norton has a further evidence in the discovery of the bones of the Frenchmen at the foot of a little butte in the SH Mountains 15 miles northeast of the King of Arizona. An old Apache Indian now living in the Mohawk Valley related the story of a fight with 3 Frenchmen in the SH Mountains to a Mexican named Grania, and the Indian consented to go with Grania to the scene of the fight. The Apache said he was a member of the band of Indians who had attacked the Frenchmen, and 7 of their number were killed before they succeeded in ending the lives of the wiry Frenchmen. The bones were found at the place the Indian guided Grania to. There were 2 skulls, a backbone, and some arm and leg bones. Grania tried to find the mine worked by the Frenchmen, but his efforts were without avail. He told Mr. Norton about finding the bones, and together they made a trip to the place. The remains of the Frenchmen were gathered up and put in a barley sack by Mr. Norton and afterwards left to mark the scene of the fight in a monument built of rocks. The bodies of the 7 Indians killed in the fight were cremated according to a custom of the Apache of disposing of their dead. Mr. Norton's prospectors are now working in the hills near this monument, where the mine is supposed to have been located. Up to the present time it remains the Lost Frenchman mine. And that's the end of this article. For one last perspective on this lost treasure story, we're going to read a page from www.geocaching.com. It reads, Arizona is home to countless lost mine legends and misplaced treasure stories. This cache is part of a series, with the stories and maps prepared by Kearney Edgerton and Sterling Ridge in the book, Somewhere Out There. Arizona's Lost Mines and Vanished Trores. The Lost Frenchman must exist. 3 men brought rich gold ore from it. 1 other man, maybe 2, have seen it. The ore, $8,000 in rough gold, was deposited in the W.B. Hooper and Company store in Yuma. The mine was discovered in the 1860s by 3 Frenchmen. Maybe it was in the Harquahala Mountains. Or the Eagle Tails. Or the Little Horn Mountains, the Big Horns, or the Little Harquahalas. The accounts vary. John D. Mitchell, Desert Magazine's Lost Mine Story anthologist, told of 2 Frenchmen appearing at the Hooper store in 1867 and leaving the ore with the storekeeper. Old Bill Bear, a Mojave sub-chief and mule driver, told the Yuma Sentinel that the year was 1864 and that there were 3 Frenchmen. At any rate, the Frenchmen bought supplies at the Hooper store and rode east. They were followed by 5 Mexicans, described by the Sentinel as an obvious band of brigands. The Frenchmen camped at Agua Caliente, the old stage station on the Gila River just east of the Maricopa County line, and at sunrise rode away to the north. The Mexicans followed. The Frenchmen led their pursuers in a wide, looping circle back to Agua Caliente and camped again. The 3 miners left under cover of night. The hijackers were left with nothing to follow but hoofprints, and these became useless when the Frenchmen separated and rode off in 3 different directions. The Frenchmen were seen again. A.H. Peoples, the noted rancher and saloon keeper, said he encountered 3 Frenchmen working a claim in the Harquahalas in 1868. In 1873, King Woolsey, Indian fighter and pioneer settler, found a large pile of rich ore on a well-marked trail through Tenache Pass. But Woolsey said there was no sign of life for miles around, just the vast silence of the mountains. In 1889, a Mexican came to Bill Bear and hired him to haul water and supplies into the Eagle Tails. En route to the mountains, the Mexican told Bear that as a boy, he had run away from home. He fell in with 3 French prospectors who offered to feed and clothe him if he would cook and take care of their camp in the mountains. The camp was near a spring, with a cottonwood and large mesquite tree nearby. Each morning the prospectors left the camp and disappeared into a canyon. Each night they returned, the Mexican related, with something in yeast powder cans. I was curious, the Mexican continued, and when they were away I looked in the cans. They contained large and small nuggets of gold. I carefully trailed them the next day and found them in a canyon about 1/4 mile from camp, busily engaged in taking out nuggets. They must have seen me, for that night they eyed me suspiciously. They moved the cans to a hiding place and beat me so much I feared for my life. One morning, after they left for their diggings, I got together some blankets, food and water and departed. I was careful to cover my tracks. I had to hide from Indians, and finally I reached Agua Caliente. The Frenchmen disappeared. I think the Indians killed them. I am now on my way to the lost Frenchman diggings. I can go right to them. But it had been too many years. Things seen in childhood, hillsides, arroyos, the shapes of mountains, are not the same when seen in later years. And that's the end of that web page, and the end of our story. Make your own conclusions about all this info.
Okay, that wraps up this episode of Lost Treasure Stories. Our next episode is coming soon, so hit that subscribe button so you don't miss it, and make sure you have your notifications turned on.